This is dedicated to all my beautiful queens, all my beautiful ladies out there. She's a queen. Go queen. You got it, girl. She's a queen. You better represent. Go queen. Go queen. Go. She's a queen about her business. Queen. Working hard on a mission. Yeah. Head high, purpose driven. Purpose driven. Crown will never tilted. Queen. Go queen. Go queen. Go queen. Go. Represent. You're a queen. You're a queen. Oh.
Well, thank you guys for joining another episode of the Key Chat podcast. Today, I have Dr. Rachel Slaughter. She's an author, educator, and advocate. We're going to talk about her platform, and she has a book entitled The Ultimate Guide for Teachers to Multicultural Literature. So I'm a parent of 3 kids. I have a younger son that's starting 7th grade, and this year and last year, I'm sure for many parents and educators, has been insane. So I'm definitely excited to talk to her so we can get some information and also encouragement for our educators, parents, and students. So how are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited about this school year, and so much so to be here to talk about education. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So I wanted first, before we talk about your guide, just to familiarize everyone, can you define multicultural literature and the importance of it before we get further into the conversation?
Absolutely. Multicultural literature is a genre that includes a multitude of different ideas, issues, platforms, people of different backgrounds, different cultures, different sexualities, right? Different races. And when you have these different ethnicities and ideas coming together, that group, that complete set of literature is called multicultural literature. And on top of that, we build multicultural education, right? So this genre is the perfect vehicle to showcase people of various different backgrounds, religious backgrounds, race, ethnicities, and cultures. Unfortunately, it isn't the premier genre in schools, and oftentimes people of color and various backgrounds are left out of the curriculum. So multicultural literature is often ignored in schools.
Well, I know right now the controversial topic is obviously critical race theory. You know, I keep hearing so much about it, people who are for it, who are against it. What's your position on it? Obviously, you recognize that multiculturalism has its place in the education system. You know, like I said, I have 3 children, and I'm always asking them, especially my 2 oldest. One has already graduated, and one is graduating high school this year. But when they started high school, I would ask them certain things like, hey, are they teaching you X, Y, Z, just certain things about Black history, things like that? And we don't live in a diverse town, and the school that is not diverse. So I would be, kind of disappointed sometimes when they be like, no, they don't teach us certain points, right. Things like that. So what's your position regarding the critical race theory debate?
Before we talk about that, I want to give a little bit of a background regarding teachers in education. First of all, it's unbelievable to understand this idea, the dichotomy that's in the classroom, which is most of the teachers are white in the classroom, right? Because the population is 87% white female in the profession. To think about that, where did they go to school, right? What teacher prep program are they coming from? Are they graduating from, right? So we can't even think about critical race theory unless we understand who's teaching critical race theory, right? If the population of teachers is 87% white, and they did not come from teacher prep programs that included multicultural education, multicultural literature, Black history, race and relations, and all of the things that go along with multiculturalism, how can we expect the teachers to teach critical race theory in the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. We're in a position now where I'm finding out through my research that not only do the teachers not have a teacher prep program that included multicultural literature, they have no idea how to define multicultural literature. They have no idea how to teach multicultural literature and information regarding people of various backgrounds, right? Mm-hmm. So you're in the position where you're putting the cart before the horse. You're talking about, the world is talking about critical race theory. Really, we need to talk about the teachers, their teacher prep programs, and how they are completely unprepared to teach diverse children. They're just not prepared.
That's, oh my God, that's a very amazing point. You're right. That's, you can put it.
And that's where the fear comes in, right? So there's the fear of critical race theory because the general idea is the teachers don't have the background in that thought process, right? In that pedagogy. They don't have the background in multicultural literature, in race and race relations to teach the information. They're really out of their element.
You're right. That does make sense. I never knew that statistic, though, that the majority of teachers are 87% white women. That does make sense because obviously that's really not the aesthetic to really teach it if they don't know. So that makes perfect sense. Now, one thing I looked at when I was looking through your information was a quote that said, "For many people of color, it is emotionally and mentally draining to attend schools where multiculturalism is not acknowledged or celebrated in education, and it plays no significant part in the curriculum. Students of color often find it difficult to articulate their feelings of loneliness and invisibility in schools where teachers do not fully embrace cultural diversity." Now, obviously, that ties to what you just mentioned, and I know and it's the funny thing is, I'm in my 40s, but even when I was a kid, I went to school slightly different because it was a Black school. We did see a lot of Black female teachers. Of course, Black male teachers were like a unicorn.
Right. And still.
Yeah. But I did have a little difference where I did see a lot of people that looked like me teaching. Fantastic. As far as now, like I said, when my children go to school, you really actually don't see Black teachers, not that often, which is, so let's elaborate on that because you just made a very good point. Like, I think it is important just for children in general, and that's of any race, but just being able to see someone that you identify with, it does give you a lot of comfort.
It's true. It's true. Sometimes I think about the children of diverse backgrounds, of different ethnicities, sitting in classrooms where teachers do not understand the population in which they're teaching, right? It's like, would you ever expect a group of white students to sit in a museum, the African American Museum, for example, all day long? The pictures are of African American people or African people every single day, and everything you talked about was of one monocultural idea. How would those white children feel? And how long do you think that could go on without parents getting involved to say, this is a travesty. My child, my brown child, does not feel welcome, does not feel included in the curriculum. How long do you think that would go on, right? You have children who are sitting in classrooms who've never read a book by a person of color. That's statistically correct, right? And I did mention an African American museum, because how often do children take field trips where they go to museums about people of color, right? Where everything and everywhere you walk, it's about somebody of color. You see something about that cultural background, right? That is how children of color feel in schools where the teacher, the primary instructor, right, is presenting materials that is a monocultural idea, right? Everything goes along with the one background or status quo of European Americans, right? It's unfair. The child feels lonely, isolated. Lonely, isolated, invisible, right? So that's to me, it's a travesty.
Oh, definitely it is. So just the points that you mentioned about just the loneliness too. And the bad part is when you're an adolescent, you're already going through an awkward stage. Childhood itself is awkward. You know, you're learning so much on how to interact with people, who you really are. And this world is so different now. So as far as multiculturalism and multicultural literature, how can that really be brought into the schools, especially, for example, let's say it's a school where the administration, the teachers, they're not multicultural. So it's like, how can that be brought into the schools? Like, what steps what can be taken, if any?
Right. And again, you make a very good point, because where would these teachers who have not been exposed to multicultural literature in their teacher prep programs, in college, in high school, where would they then all of a sudden in their teaching profession know where to find multicultural literature that's appropriate for the schools? They've never been taught that information, right? Research shows that many of these teachers have not come from programs that include multicultural literature. And as a matter of fact, the very few teachers who are part of colleges that have teacher prep programs that include multicultural literature courses, they're in courses with white people who shun the literature that they are learning, who tap each other on shoulders and nudge each other and roll their eyes when James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, when folks have to read this literature. This is research shows the teachers have what is called white bonding, where they kind of give each other the eye signal that this is something that they don't want to learn, which throws the teacher off or the professor off his game, right? And the professor ends up saying, oh, okay, we don't have to read the entire James Baldwin book, just passages. Oh, you know what? We're going to skip the Maya Angelou portion of the syllabi. Oh, you know what? We're going to just briefly discuss this particular author. That is what's happening in the teacher prep programs where multicultural literature is at the center, right? It's not Dr. Slaughter saying that, that's shows, right? So to answer your question, how can teachers learn how to choose multicultural literature? This is the text that teaches teachers how to choose multicultural literature appropriate for the classroom. And this is a stepwise book that includes directions on how to get started, right? And so the first point that I make is you need a team. You need a team of teachers in your school that will say, I am helping you, I'm helping the school find multicultural literature that's appropriate for the classroom. because not everything that's written is good for the school.
Mm.
Right? You have to be careful what you're putting in front of the children, because remember, whatever you put in front of them for them to read, reading is digesting. Reading is eating for the mind. Reading is, becomes part of your persona in some ways, right? I am absolutely every book that I've ever read. Absolutely, from grade school up to this moment. So I want to make sure that the students don't digest material that is inappropriate just because it's written by somebody of color, right? So this is the textbook that details how to get started.
You know, the most alarming thing from what you just said is any educator, I don't care what color you are, to shun any works from James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. First of all, James Baldwin alone,
right? Take
race out of it. That is when it's like, as an educator, to not want to teach James Baldwin, that's literature.
Sure. Sure.
Sad. Right. And that also goes for what are these teachers, some of these teachers, not looping them all, but what are some teachers even teaching children if you don't even want to study as an educator? Great literature from somebody as iconic as James Baldwin, as iconic as Maya Angelou. It's like, that's really frightening to think about. Scary.
And what state are you in?
I'm in Louisiana.
Okay, so here in Pennsylvania, so I'm right outside of Philadelphia. And why would we have any school in the Philadelphia School District and surrounding areas where the students aren't eating up our native writers, our writers that are right from in the city, right? So we have authors who are born and bred in Philadelphia, and you tap a student on the shoulder and say, hey, have you ever heard of this person or that person who lived right in your city? The students are unaware, and that's the teacher's fault. That's the teacher's fault. Now you could say it's the parents' fault. Sure, you could, but the teacher is the teacher. The teacher is the message sender. The teacher is the person paid, right, to teach the information.
Right.
How do you have writers who grew up on the land in which your school is planted, and you are not eating that writer's book? That does not make sense to me.
Right. It's really scary. It's a scary movie. Like the thoughts of
it's a scary movie, right?
And like you said, yeah, of course, the perfect world, parents have all this time in the world to also do this, obviously not. Like you said, and the responsibility does fall on the educator. And I'm not dismissing the responsibility of parents, we are our child's teacher. Like I said, there's a lot of conversations I've had with my kids about certain things that I know they haven't been taught in school.
Sure.
Mine is slightly different. I did grow up in New Orleans. New Orleans is a diverse city. It welcomes multiculturalism.
Yes.
New Orleans is an island as compared to the rest of Louisiana, in my opinion, which I didn't realize that until I went to another part of Louisiana, and I'm like, okay, like they're really close. So don't get me wrong. Yeah, as a parent, there is a certain responsibility I have. I have had certain conversations and introduced certain, writers, things like that. But let's be realistic, though. Let's say the parent, now most average parents are single parents. They're working, and now we live in this terrible situation where people are trying to scramble and make ends meet during a pandemic. Is it really realistic to say, oh, well, my child isn't being taught these literature figures at school, so I'm just going to take time to do it when I get home from work? That's not really realistic. So you should be able to send your child to school and have that confidence, like, wow, I know they're going to get this prime education. And it's really sad hearing that this is not the case in a lot of situations.
most situations. And I often say to teachers, your students can only, let's assume your students are only as smart as the teacher. Let's just assume that that's the vessel in which they're receiving the information. How is it that the teacher is not prepared with as much background information about the books and the authors that they're teaching, right? How is it that they're not clear or understanding how often these books about people of color are available? And I'm talking traditionally published books, non-traditionally or vantage published books, self-published books. There's a plethora of books available. Are books by people of color traditionally published as often as white people's books or books written by whites? No. However, this day and age, there are more books about people of color by people of color than there have ever been. The publishing industry is still racist, though, for other reasons, because again, they're not publishing the material as fast as they should. But there's more today than there's ever been, right? There's ever been, right? So, and with people publishing online, there is no excuse for a classroom that's devoid or has a drought of multicultural literature. There's no excuse at this point.
Wow. It's kind of wild by all of this that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So obviously right now we have the pandemic going on. As I was saying right before we hit recording, I know me personally as a parent, it's been a huge challenge. Just so many different changes, virtual school and kids is not necessarily, and then scratch that with the virtual. I know at least in my experience, there's different levels of virtual. There's some situations where it's like the child kind of self-learns. They just go ahead and grab the task, do what they got to do. There's some that are different. Either way, it's a lot, So right now, with the pandemic, what's your opinion just on how it has affected education? I know me personally as a parent, I'm like, can these kids even recover? Some children really didn't get any meat at all last year. Like, how can we recover right now, the education system?
Right. And so I worry about children and the slide or having lost information that they learned the year before the pandemic or lost information over the summer. But what they did gain while living through a pandemic is so valuable, right? How to get along with siblings when you all are living in the same house every day with no break, right? Maybe they learned how to cook. They may have learned new hobbies. They may have found a new TV show that they had not watched before. I've heard that parents and children became closer, right? Children started helping out around the house doing chores, right? I think there was a time where even parents were saying, listen, I'm going to bring back dinner at the dinner table again. All those things were happening during the pandemic, right? There were TV shows about the statistics of populations who were living through the pandemic, people who we lost through the pandemic. So there were math lessons being learned through the pandemic. I think what the children lived through is so historically relevant, right? That it may be okay that they may have slid a little behind in their academic. Honestly, children are resilient and they're very smart. Yeah. Right. So they will recover. But I'll tell you what's not going to recover. I think the teachers are going to have a tough time recovering because they also lived through the pandemic, but they taught through the pandemic, right? Online. And now they're in front of children, and they are having to expend more energy that they had not expended during the pandemic while working online. So I think teachers are just tired, and it's only October, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're back face to face with students, and they're dealing with a lot of issues that have come into the classroom that were self-contained at home for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that dynamic. But as far as students and their slide academically, I think they will recover. I do. They're very, very resilient.
Wow. That is true. Kids really, they can bounce back. I definitely will say that. And they definitely know how to adapt to things, which is a plus, and learning never stops. So you brought us some good examples, like, they probably learn different things from home. So, and interacting with their family. So that is also a plus for sure. So one of the platforms of the show is self-love. And just as you mentioned, obviously we're talking about multiculturalism, how it can relate to our children. And it's just a sense of pride, just being able to relate. And like you mentioned, the loneliness a child can feel if they cannot connect with someone. Sure. What's your take on tying self-love with children, obviously? Because we pretty much touched on that. Just sure. Tying self-love with a child and how they can be confident and how they can survive. Let's say they're, as we mentioned, most of these children are in situations where they're not receiving that multicultural education, literature. How can children get that self-love now to still be confident when they're not necessarily receiving the tools that we discussed? Do you feel there's a way that they can still foster that self-love and that self-confidence? Because it's really necessary for a child to be successful and to be happy.
Absolutely. Right. I think children need mentors. I think they need guidance, right? And I think if they can, someone in their schools who is their ally, who promises to be an ally and to advocate for people of color, right? Mm-hmm. And to maybe help the child get in touch with the library and find books in the library that they can connect to. But most of all, I think that any child who can find a mentor who will stimulate that self-joy, right? That joy, that inner happiness, and help them foster that, I think that mentor would be a hero. Because I feel bad to say I've met many children of color who have poor self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And from the outside looking into that child, as a person of color, I'm astounded at how they don't see their beauty, right? Mm-hmm. The beauty in their skin tone, light, dark, medium, right? They don't see the beauty in their eyes, in their facial structure, in their nose. This is what I was taught as a child. I was probably taught to love myself a little too much, right? My parents really pushed that self-esteem piece. And so I'm walking with that inner joy and that inner love and that inner satisfaction every day. And I'm confused at how the children don't feel the same. Yeah. Right. But I realized they may be lacking in what I had, what I was privileged to have as a child, which is I was taught at home. I went to school for discipline. I went to school for order. I had order and discipline at home, but my parents were also my teachers. Mm. My teachers at school, my parents would say, I don't know what they're telling you over there at that school, but here are the books you need to learn. Mm-hmm. Here are the people you need to study, right? There was such a confusion in my head sometimes when I went to school. I would say to the teachers, you're not as smart as my mom. Mm-hmm. If you're not talking about the books my mom is talking about, you're not my teacher. So I was confused many days because I would look at these nuns and I would say, you are so inadequate. Sometimes I would say that out loud. I would literally say that out loud because my mom was brilliant. My father was brilliant because they read and they gave from the information that was in their vessel, their academic backgrounds, they gave to me every day. So I think a lot of children are lacking that at home, that the parents are the primary teachers.
Right.
I would not rely on the teachers at school to be the primary teacher. Nothing against teachers. I'm a teacher 30 years, right? Nothing against teachers. There are some amazing teachers out there, but there are some teachers who are not allies.
Wow.
Right? And when you spend time as a young person in a classroom with a teacher who is not an ally, you are being brainwashed as a student every day. Let me tell you something. Sometimes it really makes me cry. I've spent time in elementary schools with teachers who teach kindergartners. If you could come and see how some white teachers teach little Black children, don't get close to me, don't touch me. Tapping them on the head. Don't cross this line, right? They're barking at the kids. This is not Dr. Slaughter saying this. This is actual information. This is actual information. Right. This is real information, right? Go to one of the schools in the city, to a classroom, special ed classroom, where all the kids are African American, kindergartners, right? Who have mental disabilities, mental problems, right? Mental health challenges, and the teachers are barking at them. Right? It is shocking. Right. But one day, there's going to be a change, because a parent is going to be bold enough to show up out of the blue and just peek in there. see how John is being treated. See how Jane is being treated. Just show up one day. Don't take my word for anything.
Right.
Show up.
Right.
Show up.
And you brought such a good point about how, like, you as a child, for example, you had that self-love, you had that self-confidence that was instilled in you at home. But the sad reality is that really is not the case for a lot of kids, you know, and some of it is not even intentional. I'll give some parents that. I feel like some of it's not intentional. I know, like, even when I came up, I wasn't instilled self-love.
Right.
Wasn't that my parents didn't feel that way, but it's just, that's just the environment I was in. And even now, some kids, they're not being told from home, oh, you're smart, you're beautiful. Just like, you know, they're just not. So then they're going to school, like you mentioned, and some of them are having these teachers who they're tired, they're underpaid. Now they're literally doing their job, risking their life, some of them in inadequate situations. So they don't have it to even give. Not that I'm excusing them, but I'm talking about the child here. They're not getting it from home or at school. So what about this poor child? You know, and it's really wrong because, and it, not to sound facetious, but the children literally are our future. These children are who we have to be the next leaders, you know, and it's just really unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think teachers, and I don't think that they're nefarious in any way. I don't think they're scheming to hold down people of color, but I don't think it's their primary responsibility or their thought in the morning to uplift the people of color, right? That's why you have to find the allies in your school. That's why you have to find the people who will denounce racism every day, who will say the status quo is no longer what we're doing anymore, right? I tell teachers all the time, if you can count the books of color you have in your library, you do not have enough books about people of color. It should be so numerous that you can't count them, right? Books by people of color, about people of color, it should be so many of them that it's hard to even figure out which one to choose for the day. Well, teachers say to me, well, that's not fair. Maybe it's not fair, but that's how I went to school. I went to school where there were so many books about white people. I couldn't find a book that had anything to do about me or for me or about my lifestyle, right? Was that fair? No. Nope. So now I'm creating a new law. If I come to your school and you have no multicultural literature to speak of, I got to help you out, right? The new law is I should not be able to count the amount of books you have by people of color about people of color. That's over. That's over.
Mm-hmm.
That's over. The new law is, Dr. Slaughter's law is, you're going to shower the kids with multicultural literature every day. That's the new law.
Yes. Now, out of your guide, the ultimate guide for teachers to multicultural literature, what would you say if you had to give some of the top points out of this book? If you had to take that book and someone said, hey, they put you on the spot and said, okay, Dr. Slaughter, I'm going to give you 3 points out of that book.
Yes.
Go. What would you pick, like, right now to drive home that book and the importance of it?
The number one idea that I would want to leave with anyone who reads this book is you must find the white allies in your school who will, A, stand up against racism every day and denounce the status quo and denounce the monocultural ideas that we keep repeating every day. Number 2, I would find a group of people who are willing to come together and study multicultural literature so that they can teach it properly, choose the books properly, teach the books properly, celebrate people of color, right? And number 3, I would say to involve the parents. Involve the parents in celebrating multicultural literature, right? Talk to parents and ask them, what are some of your favorite books by people of color about people of color, right? What are some of your books that you grew up reading, so that you get families involved? Because another primary problem that I see in schools is that you bring children to the classroom and leave their present life behind, their family life behind. Children are not blank slates. They are not blank slates. They're bringing a whole host of things that they can talk about, show, explain. They have so much information inside their tiny little bodies, right? They can tell you a lot of information. But oftentimes we do not use these children's frame of reference. So those are the top 3 ideas that I would want to leave the audience with, for sure.
Awesome. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. You have just really said some things that make people think, especially some people who may not have children, or just may not just be as involved or have put any thought into exactly what's taking place with some of these children when they step into these classrooms, or maybe even some educators may listen and think differently on what they can do to offer more to their students. And like I said, children really are the future, whether people think that's a silly statement or not, but they really are the future. Like it's not a slogan, it's a fact. So before we end everything, tell everyone how they can find you, where they can purchase this guide, and how they can connect with you.
Thank you so much. So it's sold in all bookstores and on Amazon. I'm asking people to try to order it from bookstores owned by people of color, like Uncle Bobby's or the Harriet Bookstore and in Philadelphia. That's one of my pushes for my audience. And you can find me on social media at Literacy University. You can find me on Facebook as Literacy Doc. Also, you can check out my videos of my different lectures on literacyuniversity.tv.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you.
Great conversation. And especially right now, like I said, as a parent, I just knew this past school year was very challenging, to say the least. So it was very refreshing just to hear this conversation. And in addition, just like you mentioned, just multicultural literature, it's important for kids in general, no matter what race they are, just to be aware of the world outside. It's not just black and white, just in order to be successful, to be intelligent, just to know more on this world and the people that's in it. And it's a shame for any child that isn't being taught just so many different aspects out there, especially with literature. Like you said, we are what we read, and that's just a beautiful thing that you said. So I just really do hope that someone can purchase your guide, as you said, an educator, and find that ally and make a change, because it really is important. So thank you guys for tuning into the Key Chat. You can catch this episode, the audio version, on all streaming platforms. And you can also watch this episode on the YouTube channel, Go Queen TV. So guys, please just make sure it does take a village. Even if you're not an educator, there are ways that we all can be mentors, that we all can make a difference in a child's life, that we all can be an example as well. So make sure you guys tune in, be safe, and go love yourself.